Amazing Departures, episode number 4.
You can be in America, you can hop a couple flights, take a little bus ride, and you can totally be transformed into this ancient culture where they have these really fascinating funeral ceremonies.
Hello listeners, my name is Tyler Fraser and I'm your host for Amazing Departures. Thank you so much for joining me on this show. There's quite a few places to get information about funeral services, including your local funeral home, and I just want to express my gratitude for joining me on this show. I have a special guest. His name is Brian Lehmann. Welcome to the show, Brian.
Hey, thanks a lot. It's very cool to be a part of this.
So you have done a project which is caught so much interest and is just so different. It's called The Living Dead. And
an odd phrase to say there when I hear it roll off your tongue.
And when I reached out to you, you were actually in Uganda, so you're an active photographer. Is that right?
That's correct. I'm an active photojournalist.
Okay. You did this project for the National Geographic. Is that correct?
Yeah, I did. It was originally I was working with a student from the University of Nebraska, and they have a $2 million endowment that they work out of to send students around the world. And she came across, some interesting things where one thing led to another. And it led us to Indonesia, where they have a very different way of handling the dead there. So, for instance, if you die there, they would immediately take off all your clothes, wash your body, and then they would pump you full of formaldehyde and place you in the corner of the house anywhere from a few months to many years. And this entire time, they're saving up money so they can give you a proper funeral ceremony. So if you're very wealthy and they would slaughter more buffaloes to honor you. And every water buffalo in this community is born to be sacrificed to honor the dead. So the most expensive one I came across was $55,000 US. A wealthy family would slaughter, let's say, a minimum of 24 water buffalo. And that would create a funeral cost of, let's say, around $200,000. So bodies would stay in the house for sometimes, 10 years, while this family's, raising money. And then all of a sudden they have this 5-day funeral ceremony, and they build these temporary buildings and carry your body up into a tower, and that's where it stays for the 5 days, and they slaughter the water buffalo beneath you, and then they'll bring you down from the tower, and they carry your body to your grave site, which is, typically could be a hole that's been chiseled in the side of a mountain by maybe some guy for a year, and that's where you're buried. But the really crazy thing that I discovered once I got there was in Taraja, you're never officially dead. And so once a year, they bring your body back out, and they will take off all your clothes again and redress you, comb your hair, inspect the condition of your body, take Facebook photos next to you so that they can show you off to their friends. And it's just obviously a very drastically different way to look at death than we do here in America.
It really is. The commitment to the memorial and the person is huge.
Absolutely. And don't think that this isn't like a mourning type thing. Like, they do mourn and they are sad, but you know, it's not just it's just so much more. Like, we would have a wedding here and they have a funeral there, and this is a celebration of your life, like, at its finest. And obviously the more wealth you have, the crazier it gets. In fact, like, if you're in, like, let's say the 1% of the 1%ers, and we're talking wealth status here, then they would actually, like, sit your body up in a chair for 3 days and 3 nights to honor you, and all your friends and family and neighbors would all come in to, like, sit next to you and eat and tell stories about you and stuff like that. And then oftentimes those people too, they would, like, as a form of preservation, they didn't believe in formaldehyde, so they would dump alcohol into their mouths and into their eyes and ears. But it's totally different. Like, when I went there, I would show up at someone's house, and it was almost like I was a gift to the body, and they were very welcoming, and they invited me right in, and I would walk in and be, like, right next to a body that had died, you know, hours before, and it was no big deal. It didn't feel odd to me either. I felt it just wasn't a big deal. Now, when I come back to America and I see, you know, if I go to a funeral or something, I have a completely different feeling, and I feel almost scared of the body, you know, as opposed to they're like touching it and holding the body. And like, one night I was driving along on a moped. I went everywhere on the moped, and I stopped at a house, and it was obvious they were having some sort of funeral type ceremony. Well, the night before, this girl had died from a high fever. She was 3 years old. And I walked in, and her cousins and her sisters were touching her. They were putting makeup on her. They were showing her toys. And to them, she was just a sick person at this point. So she was still very much alive in their minds. Because you're not officially dead there until the first water buffalo is slaughtered. But it was just so fascinating to see, because most Americans would never touch a dead body here. I mean, you know, to be a mortician is like a scary thing to some people, I think. But there, it's just totally different.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree with the concept of being afraid of the dead body. I think that you really touched on something there, that it's there's just so much process around the like processing of the dead body, and it looks so different. And really the natural elements, the natural effects of death. But I think also is, you know, lots of different elements coming together that does kind of bring the fear of the body, including perhaps generally just the fear of death itself.
Yeah, no, that's very true. I'm American to fear death, and everybody wants to live forever, and they will do whatever it takes and spend whatever amount of money. And not the Indonesians, or you know, there's not that they want to die, but it's a significantly more talked about this, you know, situation than I think than in America. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a lot of people out there who just don't even have a will, just for the simple reason that they're nervous to face the simple fact of you're going to die. And this is like a culture, American culture thing that we've somehow created, and over time, and probably, I would guess, as we've evolved over the past 100 years or so, because I'm guessing this wasn't as big of an issue, the whole like touching the body and stuff like that, when 100, 150 years ago, when you just didn't have as ample opportunity to be extremely clean.
And so, touching on that more, was there strong smells? Was being in the presence of bodies that have been decaying for years, or even like, especially the ones that didn't use formaldehyde, was that difficult?
Yeah. Well, the ones, first of all, the ones that didn't use formaldehyde, that was, I don't really know. That was so hard to find. I spent, 6 weeks driving around on a moped, stopping in every single village I possibly could to find people who still set a body up in a chair for 3 days and 3 nights. I would show up at a village, I'd meet with the village leader, we'd have coffee, and I'd say, hey, so do you guys set the dead body up in a chair here? And he was like, oh, yeah, we do that. I was like, okay, well, when was the last time you did it? They'd be like, 40 years ago. Oh, okay, well, would you do it again if it happened, like, tomorrow? And they're like, yeah, sure. And, and then, I'd be like, well, does anybody, look like they're gonna die? And they're like, yeah, there's a lot of people, but it's hard to say. We don't know. This guy, we thought he'd die last week, and now he's back to normal. So, it's crazy how we could just freely talk about it. So, but when I actually found the person who was sitting up in a chair for 3 days and 3 nights, I bought soup from some lady the night before, and I'd driven 12 hours in a totally different direction. And the lady calls me, and she's like, hey, they're sitting a body up in a chair right now. So I drive all night long, 12 hours back the other direction, and we walk into this room, and the translator I hired and I were like floored that we even found this. Like, I told the director of photography at National Geographic that I could find this, but the reality is I was definitely thinking I couldn't. I just wanted the assignment, but I worked hard enough and I did. But so back to your original question, it was I couldn't because I only saw that. Oh, this is even crazier. So when I found that body, I was helping his wife across the room, and I was feeling her arms, and I was like, man, I don't know, like, she kind of feels like, she could die too. And like, sure enough, 10 days later, she dies as well. And I ended up getting the husband and the wife in this, sitting up in a chair, and it was just unbelievable. I just could not believe it. Okay, but so the smells, there wasn't like, if I wasn't around the bodies long enough who dumped alcohol into the mouth, in the eyes, and into the ears. They would wrap those bodies up pretty quickly. But if you were freshly dead and they just pumped you full of formaldehyde, you'd walk into the room and like my eyes would just be watering, and people would stay out of the room. And I was trying to work and capture a compelling photograph, so I just toughed it out. But oh my gosh, that was brutal. As far as when they would pull the bodies outside of the graves, it was more of like a musty smell. And I did see, there's a photo on my website of a corpse that's, severely decomposed due to, some moisture got into it. I don't remember like a bad smell to that really at all. It just was like almost like a composty type smell. Like if you're, digging up like a the third round of your compost piling back. But, the smell you think of, like when you know that an animal is dead somewhere in your backyard and you've got to go find it, I never caught that scent at all, oddly enough.
So, Brian, this act of displaying the body for an extended period of time is the first part, and then there's a second part years later for a second funeral. Is that right?
Yeah. So you're a sick person until they slaughter the first water buffalo. So in American terms, you die, but to them, to the Tarajans, you're just a sick person, okay? And then they save up the money for your funeral ceremony, and then once they slaughter the first water buffalo, you are officially dead, and you will hear lots of crying, and women will just be uncontrollably upset. And then they continue your funeral ceremony until they, after 5 days, they'll bury you into this modern grave. And then, the final step then is to, once a year, they'll bring your body back out and inspect you. And they're like really proud of like the how the body, the condition of the body. Like that's very much it's a time to tell stories about the people, but it's definitely like a very happy situation for them to see you again and be like, man, he's really looking good. Like he looks strong, doesn't he?
So is this practice dying? Is it going away?
Yeah, so, the reality is that, the funeral ceremonies are really easy. You can be in America, you can hop a couple of flights, take a little bus ride, show up, and you can totally be transformed into this ancient culture where they have these really fascinating funeral ceremonies. The stuff where they're sitting the body up in a chair, or they are bringing the bodies back out, that took endless amounts of legwork, weeks to track down and just figure out what was going on, where it was happening, when it was happening, how often it happens, and it really was sort of a mental nightmare, because I called everybody I could in America who had researched these colonies. I called all sorts of people in cities. Nobody could tell me anything about anything, and so we literally had to just get on mopeds, and this translator and I would work for days on end, and we would hit up every single village in Taraja and started building a database of who sits dead bodies up in chairs and who doesn't, and we had everybody's phone numbers, and we would call them like every few days just to see. So the second we heard of something, we were on it.
Brian, would you describe the people of Taraja as happy people?
These are amazingly happy people that are extremely hardworking and thoughtful of others. They are not people who are going to rip you off. They are out to present their culture to you and to be a good steward of not only Taraja, but also Indonesia. I could not say a single bad thing about them.
Do you know of any other place in the world that has similar rituals?
I don't know of another place in the world that's like this. I mean, where they, actually bring bodies back out to, hoist them up in the air and take Facebook photos next to them. Well, a lot of these funeral ceremonies have evolved over time, I think. Of course, nobody can give me a history on it from what I could find. And I don't know why. I think it's just very difficult to figure out because, you could be at one village and they have, they do some certain ceremony, then you go to the next village. They don't believe in that similar ceremony. But as far as these big, elaborate, expensive funerals, it's very much like a country club status type thing, and I think over time it just gets gaudier and gaudier and gaudier, and that's where you get like, you'll hear of somebody every once in a while, they'll slaughter like 150 water buffalo, and they will like have 50-foot high towers that they put the bodies in, and they'll invite like 2,000 people to their ceremonies, and they build all these temporary buildings with and drape them all in red, and they'll build wooden statues too, that are like exact replicas of the deceased, and it's just a status symbol in Taraja.
Caitlin Doty is a prominent author and video maker, and I just finished her book, Smoke Gets in Your Eyes, and I think she'd probably like to see more of this type of ritual, not necessarily the gaudy, but just being more connected to the dead. Brian, what made you want to become a photographer, videographer?
I started out at the university getting a business degree, and that just wasn't for me. I'm an outdoorsy type person. Then I started doing flying lessons, and I had a really nasty first, stall in the air, where as you're learning, your instructor teaches you to perform this stall in the air, and you slow the plane way down, you pull the yoke back, and I think he just gave me a little bit too dramatic of one, and that sort of freaked me out. And so then I lived down the street from another National Geographic photographer, and I called him up and said, "Hey, do you do internships?" And he's like, "Yeah, sure, come on over." And so I'm thinking, all right, this is awesome. We're going to go to Chapel World, and I'm going to go like photograph lions and tigers and stuff like that. Well, it wasn't like that at all. In fact, for the first couple of years, he hardly noticed me until one night he needed some shelves built in his basement, and I stayed up till 3 a.m. getting these done for him. And from then on, I was golden. And this guy would just help mentor me. Still to this day, he continues to help me. But early on, we had a hard labor trade going. He likes to redo old homes, so I would pull nails from, old boards, and he wanted to redo his back patio once, so I got this historic home, and so I had to hand chip cement off of like thousands of bricks and then sand them down perfectly. I'd scoop pig poo out of a barn for days on end. I mean, just like hideous jobs, but at the end of the day, there was always this payoff, and it was to learn something really interesting about photography, something that could benefit me in photography, but it could also just be like just simple life examples, and that things that probably my parents would say, but sometimes you just need a mentor to teach you things during that time in your life where you don't want to listen to your parents.
What was your reaction when you learned that you'd be photographing preserved dead bodies?
Right when I started picking up a camera in college, National Geographic was my goal. And so, when I finally was able to get that assignment, it was an amazing feeling. But unfortunately, you're really only as good as your last photograph there. And so the second you screw anything up, you're immediately forgotten about or fired. So there was actually not a lot of excitement, and more of I really want to succeed and do whatever it takes to capture really cool photographs.
Did you use a flash, or was this all natural light?
Almost everything I use is natural light. I tend to take naps during the day or work inside and then shoot early morning or late evening so that you can use really great light. Occasionally I would set up a bunch of remotes And I had to photograph there's a tree there where they bury babies in, and so if you're born and you die without teeth, then you're buried in a baby grave tree. And I wisely rigged, 4 or 5 different flashes around the scene to, make this an interesting look. But predominantly, it was really just one camera body and one lens. I'm pretty simple, and I'm just constantly looking for a well-layered photograph with a lot going on. I'm not the most artsy guy in the world. I'm more of a literal shooter, so I rely heavily on high-impact photo with some really visually interesting elements, and that's probably why I was drawn to this story to begin with.
I used to be really passionate about photography and can remember just getting out of college and working for the National Park Service. I listened to a ton of podcasts like The Candid Frame and other podcasts that were big 10, 15 years ago. And I remember the concept of a project and how I really latched onto that. And I think that this project that you've done here is just really so important to end of life rituals and also photography.
I agree with you. Beyond this being extremely visually interesting, in my own family, we really don't talk about death that much. My parents were slow to even develop their own will. My mom does not want to talk about death, and I understand, but, this type of story, I think, gets people considering that a little bit more and maybe being more open with their family so that you don't get caught at the end of life having things happen to you that you probably may or may not have wished had you just either created a will or discussed it with your family ahead of time.
So listeners, you can see this project on Brian Lehmann's website at brianlehmann.com. And there's also a short documentary on National Geographic's YouTube. Is that right?
Yeah, there's something on Geographic, also at Brian Lehmann Instagram. But was it Brian Lehmann Photography on Instagram? There's a really fascinating 15-second video clip that got 3.7 million views when National Geographic Instagram had half as many followers in 24 hours.
Wow.
That's worth checking out. It really gives you a great glimpse quickly as to this unique culture.
Brian, I can't thank you enough for being on the show. It's really a pleasure.
Yeah, this is awesome. I feel honored to, I've never done a podcast before, so this is a very cool thing for me too.
Thanks, Brian. Listeners, thanks so much for listening to Amazing Departures. I'm your host, Tyler Fraser. Until next time.